In this talk, I'm going to give what I observe to be the top gun control logical fallacies, or in other words, logical fallacies utilized by advocates of gun control, or we could also say logical fallacies found within gun control propaganda. So, to define terms here, to reduce any possible confusion, when I say gun control, I'm referring to what is being currently debated as far as the disarming of nonviolent people. The debate is really about disarming nonviolent people, right? There's focus on these violent events, and then the proposed solution is actually concerning nonviolent people because it's already been established as ethically sound to stop someone, to control someone who is actually being violent. So, quote unquote, gun control is really a misnomer, or it's misleading. It's deceptively ambiguous because what it really means is disarming nonviolent people. And to define the other term here of logical fallacies are basically bad counter arguments. Another way they've been defined is flawed thinking, or we can also think of them or define them or label them manipulative psychological tactics or manipulative propaganda. To be more specific, what I've discovered is that actually all logical fallacies can be put into three categories. Those categories are, number one, abusive language; number two, false equivalencies or false definitions; and number three, assumptions. So, in the context of a debate or an argument, if someone is responding to your argument or is giving their own argument in the form of abusive language, false equivalencies, or assumptions, they are utilizing logical fallacies. And so their argument is not sound. It's an invalid argument. It doesn't hold water. It doesn't make sense. It's not a legit argument. So, with those terms clarified, let's begin with the number one gun control logical fallacy, which is appeal to pity. Appeal to pity actually falls under the abusive language category of logical fallacy, and the reason for that is because it's deceptive speech. It's lying for a selfish purpose. So the detail here being that it's trying to emotionally manipulate someone to go along with their argument by appealing to their conscience, appealing to their compassion, right? So in the context of gun control, we have these very real tragedies of innocent people being killed. And so they'll appeal to your compassion and your desire to end such occurrences if such a thing was possible, or at least, your desire to lessen the frequency and number, of these occurrences. So it's not actually necessarily giving a sound argument for their supposed solution. It's just saying, well, isn't this terrible, and just basically harping on the tragic and sad nature of the event over and over and over again to put your focus on that and then hope you don't really analyze what they're offering as a solution. So that's why it's a logical fallacy and that's why it's deceptive. You have to be careful when people are talking about something sad and tragic while simultaneously offering a supposed solution. They might be utilizing this deceptive and manipulative propaganda technique called the appeal to pity. Next up is appeal to guilt. Now, in this context of gun control and shootings, these tragedies that have been occurring, it's actually an appeal to false guilt. So, appeal to guilt in this context is really directed at all gun owners who are nonviolent and trying to make them basically feel guilty for their gun ownership, as if they somehow are in part to blame for a violent act by someone else. And hopefully in their eyes and the view of the propagandist, they're trying to manipulate gun owners to feel guilty for something that isn't actually their fault, right? If you own a gun to protect your family and yourself, and there's a shooting, a tragic shooting that happens, somewhere else, you are in no way guilty for that. And um, any suggestion that you are is false. It's an appeal to guilt. It's the logical fallacy known as the appeal to guilt. Similar is number 3 on the logical fallacy list here, which would be guilt by association. So appeal to guilt is more directed at gun owners, but guilt by association is more directed at non-gun owners to have them associate violent gun owners with non-violent gun owners as if they're the same group of people, right? Anyone with a gun is basically associated with anyone violent, that uses a gun in a violent way. So this is guilt by association, logical fallacy number 3. Number 4 would be repetition. So this is also under the abusive speech category because of its aggressive nature, which is basically the idea or the tactic of just repeating something over and over and over, just bombarding people with a lie, with a fallacy over and over and over until they believe it, right? So it's this manipulative psychological tactic, recognizing that if someone hears something every day over and over, week after week, month after month, year after year, that they're likely to believe it just because of that repetition. So it's sort of a brainwashing technique, which is aggressive and not a valid argument. You can say something false a million times, it doesn't make it true, but it can actually manipulate people to think it's true via that repetition, via that aggressive repetition. So that's the gun control logical fallacy number 4. For number B, the false dilemma, where both options given are negative to the listener or viewer. So in this context, it's saying to the gun owner, either turn in the weapons that we say you have to turn in, or, the magazines that we say you have to turn in. And if you don't, um, these tragedies are going to continue. The forced dilemma fallacy is persuading someone or trying to force someone to choose between two undesirable options. So a person doesn't want to lose their ability to defend themselves properly, but they also don't want these tragedies to occur. But that's a false dilemma, because there is the more obvious, you could say, third solution outside of those two bad choices, which is just, not changing anything about what's supporting these tragedies. And the other bad choice of nonviolent people disarming themselves would be to not have these gun-free zones where people are defenseless and these drugged up shooters go to, like 9 times out of 10, as their choice place to commit mass murder, right? Because they figure there's not going to be anyone there that can defend themselves or defend others. So doing away with those unconstitutional and just unethical gun-free zones and allowing people to be armed there, so that if some drugged up crazy person arrives, they can be stopped immediately, rather than there being nobody there able to stop them. And then additionally, the sick and twisted response of law enforcement, especially to this last tragedy where they actually stayed outside while children were being killed, and even prevented parents from going in to try and save their children, right? So that is not helping the situation. Obviously, if it wasn't a gun-free zone in the first place, and if people were allowed to immediately intervene and stop the shooter, the only way to stop the bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, that would be the logical, better third choice outside of this false dilemma. Okay, logical fallacy number 6 is exigency. That's spelled Exigency. And so this logical fallacy is basically the manipulative tactic of saying, hurry up and agree before another tragedy happens, That's what the politicians are harping: the gun control, the gun confiscation, the anti-Second Amendment, more socialist-minded, control freak politicians are utilizing this very often, saying, hurry up, before there's another shooting. We need to push these laws through. We need to basically abolish the Second Amendment before there's another tragedy. So they're trying to distract you from whether that's actually a sound argument, and whether that's actually ethical and rational and based on fact, and just have you get caught up in a rushed, let's hurry and do something, let's do anything, whether it's good or bad, we got to do something. So something's better than nothing, and so let's ram these gun control laws through and get them passed as quickly as possible, right? Hurry up, hurry up. That's exigency, and it's a logical fallacy. Next up, number 7 would be two wrongs make a right. So this would be under the assumption category of logical fallacies, and it's fundamentally the assumption that morality is canceled when immorality happens. So if someone does something bad, if someone does something violent, well, now I can do something bad and violent too. So that's an assumption not based on sound reasoning. If you're thinking that responding to violence with force is the same as violence, that's incorrect. Defensive force is not equivalent to aggression. It's not equivalent to the initiation of violence. Stopping someone who's being violent is not the same as initiating the violence in the first place. So, responding to violence doesn't require violence. You don't have to do evil in response to evil, right? If someone is hurting someone else, you can stop them without actually being violent. That's using defensive force. If your response is excessive, that would be violent, right? If someone punches you and you kill them, that's actually a violent response. That would be an example of two wrongs make a right, because the initial act was wrong because it was an act of aggression, the punch. But if the response is excessive force, that's actually violent too. So it's this idea of, well, I had the right to do evil because they did evil too. And that's false. That's irrational. It's a logical fallacy known as two wrongs make a right. Okay, number 9 is appeal to fear, which is actually concerned with or is a form of intimidation. So the fear being on your end if you are intimidated. And so in this context of gun control by the state, or the monopolization of weaponry by the state in the name of safety and the greater good, this is simply saying, well, turn in all your guns, or you're going to be fined, jailed, or possibly even killed, right? If you resist our aggressive act of disarming nonviolent people. So it's just intimidation. People don't want to give in their guns, but they're intimidated by the state who's threatening them. So that's not a sound argument. It's not saying, well, gun control is rational, true, and correct, because it's just saying do it or else, right? It's just might is right. It's just pushing fear. It's just pushing intimidation. So that's logical fallacy number 9 here. And number 10 is appeal to authority. So appeal to authority is the assumption that whoever is deemed the authority is just automatically correct. Whatever they say, whoever is the current politician in power, or whoever is on your TV and designated the expert, well, then whatever they say is true, rational, and correct just because of their position of supposed authority. And related to this is the idea that obedience to whoever these people are equals the moral good, or that your social duty is equivalent to obedience to these so-called authorities. And of course, we're indoctrinated by this from a young age, right, to believe that obedience to whoever the authority is, whether it's an educational authority, a teacher in a classroom, or a politician or whoever, that's equivalent to being a good person. That's equivalent to the moral good. It's just obedience to the authority. And so it's an assumption that whoever is deemed the authority is correct, is the morally superior person. Right? So that is logical fallacy number 10. So I hope you found this insightful, and it's important to keep this in mind, because what's actually occurring is, without a doubt, deceptive, and for the purpose of giving more power and control to the already powerful, those that are already abusively controlling populations, and they're just seeking even greater power and control, of course, in the name of safety, of course, in the name of the greater good. But if you're being abused, you're not safe. So this isn't actually making the world a better place. As I was discussing with the logical fallacy of, two wrongs don't make a right, it's not a solution to add even more aggression to the situation, right? We have a violent action, and then they're saying, well, the solution is for us to be even uh, to be violent towards even more people by disarming all of these nonviolent people, right? Which, by the way, historically speaking, is a precursor to genocide, precursor to even further tyranny and totalitarianism, right? Once a population is disarmed, governments get even more intoxicated by the increased power they gain via that disarmament, and then tend to be even more aggressive and tyrannical. So disarming nonviolent people is a bad idea. It's bad thinking. It's manipulative propaganda. All right, thank you for listening.